Alright, it's finally time to talk about the From Software game that begins with E and ends with Ring. That's right, the critically acclaimed Eternal Ring for the PS2. Yeah, that's what you thought I meant, right? Okay, all jokes aside, I always intended for Eternal Ring to be part of this marathon. I even made reference to it back in the Demon's Souls review at the start of this whole mess that I've been working on over the last 6 weeks. So after all this time working up through the From Software games from 2009 forward, we're now going to take a step back to the From Software of the past before the Scr00bl0rd mastermind, Hidetaka Miyazaki, even worked there. As most people are aware of, From Software got their start putting out games with their 1994 title, Kingsfield. While it was originally intended to be a PC game, they decided to instead develop it for the PS1. It made its way to the United States, where it was profitable, regardless of receiving some mixed reviews. This allowed them to make sequels, as well as a few more original IPs like Armored Core, Echo Knight, and Shadow Tower. If you haven't heard of that last one, no one blames you, but it's notably known as being a spiritual successor to Kingsfield. Come the time of the good old 1999, a company known as Agetec started releasing select From Software titles in the United States. This was Agetec's MO. They were a publishing company known for bringing Japanese titles to the United States. From Armored Core to the Clock Tower sequel, they were actually responsible for introducing us Yanks to Japanese games we probably never would have known about without their help. Now, around the time that we were partying, as it was 1999, Sony executives had finally surfaced to their first breath of fresh air since 1994 when the PlayStation came out and they all began drowning in their own money. Much like most of the other wealthy businessmen of their time, since they were able to officially see the end of their money mountains, they decided that they needed more and were over the moon when they found out that their slave monkeys had already begun designing the PlayStation 2. However, it would be 6 years and a whole nother console generation until Sony decided that they should put out a console with no games.
The PS3 has no games.
So they set out to find launch titles for their upcoming console. When the PS2 launched in North America, it had 29 different games to choose from. However, while it launched in October of 2000 in the United States, it had been out since March of 2000 in Japan, and they had very few games to choose from on launch day. They had A-Train 6 for all the middle-aged men who didn't have room in their tiny Japanese apartments for model train sets. There was Drum Mania for the rhythm game fans, Kakenoki Shogi 4 for the puzzle game fanatics, Kessen for the Japanese nationalists, and our topic for today, Eternal Ring. That's right, Eternal Ring was the first ever RPG released on the PS2. Not only that, but Eternal Ring utilizes a first-person perspective, so it was also the first ever first-person game on the PS2. Man, and you probably thought that Souls series was when FromSoft first started to really innovate. After releasing in Japan and eventually the rest of the world, it received mixed reviews. Some reviews pretty low, some offering high praise, but mostly just sort of in the middle. On top of this, I've actually been unable to find any type of sales numbers for the game. I can't imagine it was a failure due to not only being one of the 4 games released for the PS2 on launch, as well as the only RPG, but beyond that, I can't imagine it cost From Software a whole ton of money and time to put this thing together, but we'll get back to that later. Anyways, after taking the massive From Software package on my chin for the last 6 weeks with their biggest selling titles, how does Eternal Ring hold up? Well, let's start with the part most likely to hold up the least with these old PS2 games, the graphics. Fortunately, Eternal Ring looks really good for one of those old first PS2 games. Yeah, it's obviously a bit dated, especially when it comes to character models, but I've definitely seen worse. On the other side of that, however, I have definitely seen better. A lot of the wall textures do look a little close to a higher resolution late PS1 game more than like this next generation PS2 game. I can imagine when people first saw this thing on launch, it probably turned some balls. But come just a couple of years later, most games coming out put Eternal Ring to shame graphically. Part of this is because it's all 3D. While other stuff like Resident Evil Code Veronica X looked better due to its pre-rendered backgrounds, games like Grand Theft Auto that did full 3D looked so much better, and that came out less than 2 years after Eternal Ring did. Although graphics isn't really why I came here. I came to experience some long-forgotten FromSoft history, and graphics aren't really the main discussion when it comes to their games. With that in mind, let's talk about something From Software is really known for, which is their storytelling and world design. You play as Kane Morgan, a dashing blonde and one of the last magicians left in existence, as he's taking a boat ride to the Island of No Return. Reason being is that the king of Kane's homeland, who the manual actually says is only 18 years old, has been given the runaround by the country's elders regarding a sudden expedition to said island. When the king eventually probed about this, he got some line of shit about them just being in search of new magic, but after digging some more, he discovered they were actually looking for some ring of immense power. Upon learning this, the still pubescent king orders Mr. Morgan to make his way to the island so he can find out what those pricks are actually fucking doing. The night before he leaves on his adventure, Kane's father gets hammered with his son and openly admits that he adopted Kane after finding him alone on the beach knowledge of the Island of No Return after a war took place there. Armed with this knowledge, a short sword, and a bit of understanding of magic, you depart for the island with the hopes of being the first one to defy the island's name. Beyond just the setup, there does end up being some intrigue here, which eventually leads to Kain learning things about his own past. While it is a pretty standard fantasy plot altogether, the writing in Eternal Ring is actually shockingly good for an early PS2 title. All the characters you meet around the Island of No Return actually do act like the kind of people you would expect to see in such an environment, even though they are few in number. Without wishing to spoil anything, you do eventually find out what's happened to almost everyone on the island, which involves a curse and people transforming into beasts over time, which slowly erodes their humanity. Huh, that sounds like something else I've been playing recently, doesn't it? On top of good character writing, all of the people you meet in Eternal Ring are fully voice acted. Normally in games like this from around this time, voice acting tends to be notoriously bad. However, the voice acting here is surprisingly good, and you will actually find yourself getting attached to some of the main players here, as well as even some of the characters you only talk to once or twice. Once you get a sense as to what's actually going on in the world, even minor characters start to feel sympathetic, and this is an extremely pleasant surprise that Eternal Ring brings to the table. As far as the level design goes, Eternal Ring goes for a large, interlocking open world that's split into two halves, basically. The way that this works is that all the areas in the first half of the game can all be traveled in between and then back to each other. Then after kind of a certain plot point, you're dumped into the second half of the game where that can all be traveled in between as well. Given this, it's impossible for a player to break their save file by going somewhere too early because they can always walk back to a previous area and grind up a bit before continuing on to the challenges ahead. While Eternal Ring is a spiritual successor to the Kingsfield games that came out before it, there's a lot of similarities to the staples we now associate with the Souls games. The game gets ridiculously difficult right after the tutorial area. There's an underground poison swamp level with poison casting moths. We got a late game section that takes place in a tower of storms, as well as having to collect 4 of something in order to open the way to the final area, which takes place in this voidish netherworld where you take a really long walk to the final boss. Yeah, there's a lot of things here that remind me of the first Dark Souls specifically, and I wonder if there was anything about Eternal Ring that ended up inspiring that game in particular. One way Eternal Ring isn't like the Souls games, however, is the gameplay. Like I mentioned earlier, Eternal Ring utilizes a first-person perspective just like the Kingsfield games before it. This is definitely an adjustment for anybody who isn't used to these types of older games, especially given the controls, which are charitably absolute shit. Regardless of the fact that the DualShock 2 comes with dual analog sticks, using them for movement and camera controls would just not have been quite 2000 enough, so here's what you get. D-pad for moving up and down, as well as turning left and right, L1 and R1 for strafing left and right, L2 and R2 for aiming the camera up and down. This controls as uncomfortably as it sounds, especially when having to deal with enemies that are flying around in the air. On top of just trying to maneuver around a three-dimensional space this way, you also have to balance sword and magic attacks while you do so. See, the way magic works in the Eternal Ring universe is by, shockingly enough, using rings imbued with magical powers. Early into the first dungeon, you find your first usable ring, which casts Fireball, as well as several rings of magic that at this time do nothing. After completing the tutorial area, however, you gain the ability to take a portal to this floating mage who can combine the gems you get from killing enemies with rings of magic to create new rings with various powers. There are fire gems, water gems, earth gems, wind gems, light gems, and dark gems. All gems have a level of strength ranging from 1 to 5, and combining stronger ones create stronger types of whatever magic you set the ring to. The only real issue with this is that you never know what combining the gems will make, and a lot of times you end up using high-level gems to create a ring that you already own. So then, you're stuck reloading your save so that you can go back and try again. It's fucking annoying, and I would recommend looking up a guide on what gems create what rings if you play this thing. I didn't, because I'm a moron, but I recommend that you do. You can also reuse old rings by adding more gems to them to turn them into stronger ones, as well as magic rings you use for healing, attacking, and casting statuses like silence, for example. You can also just combine gems without a ring of magic to create attribution rings, which provide you with buffs. You can equip 5 rings of magic as well as 5 attribution rings at one time. You switch between your equipped rings by pressing circle. So, while you're using both the D-pad and the shoulder buttons to strafe around an enemy, you have to press circle to change to whatever ring that you want and then press square to cast. There's also a stamina bar of sorts that has to refill before you can cast another spell, which takes longer the stronger the spell is. So get used to trying to keep one eye on tracking avoiding whatever enemy you're fighting in this low FOV clunky first-person view, as well as trying to keep track of your spell bar refilling so that you can attack properly. After a couple of hours, you will get used to this, and if you can look past it, then you will find a fun little piece of both From Software and PS2 history. The one thing that really does suck about Eternal Ring is the fact that it's extremely clear that there was so much of this game left on the cutting room floor. Like I said before, the game world is split up into two sections between two halves of the game. The first half feels really complete, even down to having a couple extra areas that you can go to and explore and solve puzzles in, just to level up and get some really extra cool rings. The second half of the game world, however, is extremely short and highly linear. On top of this, there are very few bosses in the main game, with only a couple of extra dungeons that you have to go out of your way for, one of which is a secret dungeon that I would be actually shocked if you can find. The game does a lot of setup about these dragons that are all around the game world, but you really only fight one of them. There's one that you find sleeping in a cave early on, and the internet says that you can kill it if you have a particular ring and a ridiculously high level of dark magic. However, if you are able to keep it from one-shotting you immediately and somehow manage to put it down, the game just glitches out and the character model of the dragon just pops back up, still sleeping the way it was before you fucked with it. This is what I'm getting at. There's a dragon design for the 5 elements of fire, water, air, ice, and earth, which I'm sure were all originally intended to be bosses, but 2 of them are asleep, one of them you just run away from for a minute before a cutscene plays and you never see him again, and one of them is used for plot dumps. The only one that you really fight is the wind dragon, and I used this ring I made called Bomber, and I absolutely destroyed him in about a minute and a half. While I did enjoy the way the plot ramped up towards the end, I was ultimately a bit let down when the second half of the game was so blatantly rushed to make the PS2 launch date, and I would have preferred if From Software would have had the time to really flesh this thing out and make the game that you could tell they really wanted to. So, all in all, while Eternal Ring has a slow start and it took some time to get used to, I'm glad I really did take the time to sit down and play it. While it's antiquated and certainly not for everyone, if you're willing to chug through it and give it a go, I would recommend it. Buried beneath a bit of rush production and odd old school controls is a really in-depth game world with an interesting gameplay mechanic, good writing, solid voice acting, and a large list of rings for the completionists to mix their stones into. Especially now that it's been uploaded onto the PlayStation Store for the PS4 and PS5 for the totally worth it price of $15, I would say you should satisfy your curiosity if this review has managed to leave you with any. Later, Oh, would you look at that? My stupid funny junk level Jimmy Neutron joke broke. Oh well, I guess I'll have to find another way to end these wastes of space videos. Anyway, while I have you here, I wanted to take a moment to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand. I obviously pulled one of those stupid fake outs here, and I'm not just going to skip over Elden Ring. Truth is, while I had originally planned to play Elden Ring over these last 6 weeks on top of playing the games for these reviews, that ended up really not working out. I have played a bunch of it whenever I can, and I have gotten a decent ways into it, but I'm not even half done with the total content. It turns out that playing through 6 From Software games in 6 weeks, as well as writing and recording and editing videos, is extremely time consuming. And with everything else that goes on in my life, it doesn't really leave a lot of time or energy for powering through this massive open world game that's extremely difficult. On top of that, I don't have a PS Plus subscription, so playing online isn't really an option for me, and I'm working through all the harder stuff by myself. Moreover, man, I'm just burnt out. As much as I love making these videos, doing a marathon is a completely different beast, especially since I've been doing my best to hold myself to a review a week. While I know this isn't necessary, especially given that I only have 19 subscribers as of time of writing, it's something I do because I know who I am. While it may not be evident from these reviews, I'm a perfectionist when it comes to the things I create, and I know if I don't hold myself to a deadline, these videos would never get done. Still, though, I find myself feeling very unhappy with the way they've shaped up. While I am able to go back to the reviews I did just a couple of years ago and see how much better I've gotten in my writing and editing, I'm very painfully aware of how much I have left to improve. I haven't figured out how to record in a way that allows me to capture everything I write about, so my visuals don't match up with what I'm discussing. I can't record using HDMI, and the computer that I use to make these things is an actual toaster. It struggles to run the bare basic video editing software that I use to make these things. Even if it did run smooth as butter, I haven't taken the time to really learn the ins and outs of everything that the software has to offer, which obviously limits my ability to produce high quality content. After giving all of this a lot of thought, I've come to this conclusion. First off, for the time being, no more marathons. And while I'm at it, no more games that I can't capture footage for myself. Second, I need to take the time with my next few videos to figure out a structure that's more than just this bare bones format I've been stringing together with sticks and clay. And third, I need to actually talk about Elden Ring. Well, I did set out when I started this marathon to do Eternal Ring the week before I did Elden Ring. I haven't gotten through enough of the game to do a full review, and frankly, another week spent with my free time in front of a screen powering through another FromSoft game would probably be the thing that would make me want to bite down on a shotgun, the same way Edward Norton made that guy bite down on the curb in American History X. So if you want an Elden Ring review, here's the best you're gonna get. Elden Ring is the latest game developed by From Software, and more importantly, headed over by Hidetaka Miyazaki, who is responsible for overseeing the best out of the 6 games that I've discussed over this last month and a half. Pairing up with George R.R. Martin, who I've heard gained popularity from some fantasy book series he wrote, they set out with their own development team to create a new world that FromSoft fans can enjoy fucking around in. What we got is a new form of From Software open world design that takes a lot of influences from MMO games, while also combining with it a single player design that manages to actually balance the best of both worlds. One of the things I really love about Elden Ring is the way it begins. It starts you off in a tutorial area that's extremely reminiscent of the Souls games, most specifically Dark Souls 3. Towards the end of the tutorial, you get to an area known as the Chapel of Anticipation, which is hands down the funniest bit that I've ever seen in a From Software game. This ends in a boss fight that the game figures you'll lose to, which kicks off the transition into the game proper, and most importantly, the new design of their open world. Even if you do manage to beat the boss, the game just straight drops you off a cliff for funsies so that the real game can begin. What I love about this tutorial is the way it subverts the expectations of even the most hardened FromSoft fans. This tutorial was designed in a way to feel like the older games, just to dump you off in a new, unfamiliar territory after lulling you into the creature comforts of the traditional Scr00bl0rd design. Once you're introduced to the world of Elden Ring, however, you quickly learn where the main world design changes actually are. First off, bosses. Bosses everywhere. This is similar in my mind to the way Sekiro placed bosses all over the place for the player to discover and fight at their own leisure. However, where fighting bosses in Sekiro is the only way to grow stronger, Elden Ring gives you the ability to explore all the other random areas around the main world, of which there are many. Everywhere you look, there's another hidden cave or area that's tucked away into every little corner of Elden Ring for the player to explore, and most of which have these really cool boss fights. Every boss monster that I fought in the 70 hours that I put into Elden Ring has been, at the very least, interesting. Just right next to the main area that you start in, there's a little cave that, as well as most of the other areas, has a design very similar to those Chalice dungeons in Bloodborne. At the end of which is a cat-themed boss that moves and twists around like a wind-up doll, which is just so creepy and fun and unique. Beyond just that, there are some really cool enemy designs as well. Elden Ring takes a little bit from the different styles and themes of everything from Demon's Souls forward in order to combine them into this one fantastical world. My favorite enemy design so far has been these Evil Dead-esque hands with way too many fingers that crawl along the ground like spiders. They're as fantastical as they are spine-tingling, and I just love every second of it. I mentioned a couple of paragraphs back that Elden Ring has some MMO inspirations to its world design, and that's one of the more interesting aspects to me. More specifically than just MMO, it reminds me strongly of my days way back when I used to play vanilla World of Warcraft. A lot of this has to do with the color coding on the map. The area you start in is colored green, whereas the middle areas have sort of a yellow tint and the harder areas have a hard red color to them. There's a difficult part of the map that's attached to the starting area called Khalid, which is a dark red and full of very high-level enemies and dungeons and dragons. On top of just a level design feeling like WoW, in Elden Ring you have a horse that you can summon out of the ether to explore the world on. And the way in which you do so is almost exact to how one summons a mountain World of Warcraft. I love this aspect of the game because I miss vanilla/Burning Crusade World of Warcraft, and having a single-player experience that can sort of fill that hole is something I've wanted since Cataclysm came along and fucked everything up. While I am unable to play online, the developers seem to have kept people like me in mind and left us with these things called spirit ashes. These are summons we can find throughout the world that provide us with different monsters and men alike that can help with crowd control and boss fights. Discovering and utilizing these has been essential in helping me defeat some of the harder bosses, optional or not, that I've been put up against so far. Going back to the horse for a minute, this element of the game is definitely a mixed bag. While it does provide some really cool boss experiences that were designed around the horse, the actual combat mechanics built around fighting on the horse are shoddy at best. Fighting large enemies on the horse like the dragons is awesome. Especially the first one you're most likely to find in the lake area right outside the first main site of Grace, which I tend to refer to as G-spots, by the way. The first dragon fight just comes out of nowhere and surrounds you with this epic music and a rainstorm that just pours down on you as you dodge massive flame blasts and chase the dragon around the lake. These are the type of moments that really bring the horse mechanic to life, but mostly it'll just be used as a way to maneuver around the world at a decent pace. The magic system has been given a little bit of an overhaul as well, with the addition of things like spirit ashes and weapon arts utilizing your magic meter, as well as miracles and pyromancies being sort of rolled into one. Elden Ring offers a lot more options when it comes to magic than any of the other post-Demon Souls FromSoft games. I've never been one for magic in these games. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm more of a dex man than a cast man, so I went into Elden Ring as a samurai. I was really glad they kept a little bit of Sekiro in there with the samurai character, and while the Uchi Katana is useful as always, it isn't as broken as it was in Dark Souls 3. I complained during the brief moments in the Sekiro video when I discussed Dark Souls 3 that there didn't really feel like much of a reason to mess with the other melee weapons when the Uchi Katana was right next to the start, and with a fire gem you could just break the shit out of the game. I haven't spent much time messing with other weapons in Elden Ring either, and have been maining my Uchi Katana all the additions of different styles of magic, craftable arrows, firebombs, and weapon arts. I feel like I have so many other options when it comes to approaching different combat strategies, and the Uchi Katana feels more like just one staple of my arsenal rather than this crutch that I rely on. So yeah, Elden Ring is great, but you knew that already. It's been critically and commercially successful, and in my experience has brought a lot of new people into this series who previously found it impenetrable and inaccessible prior to Elden Ring's launch. While there were some old school From Software fans that were not, well, fans of the open world design, I'm not one of them. And moreover, I say to them thus: where the fuck else were they supposed to go from here? They revolutionized third-person action games with Demon Souls, they doubled down and hit it big with Dark Souls, which changed gaming history seemingly overnight. They tackled action horror with Bloodborne, they focused the mechanics down to the bare bones with Sekiro while simultaneously just polishing them to a mirror shine. What the fuck else do you want? If anything, the thing I find most interesting is to look at Elden Ring in comparison to Sekiro, since they were the two From Software releases that came out next to each other. One is designed for the most hardcore of the hardcore FromSoft junkies, while the other is designed to take the Soulsborne model and open it up to being accessible to almost every type of fantasy gamer. While I'm not going to make assumptions as to where From Software is going to go from here, I'm glad to see that they can adopt the popular models of modern AAA development and outdo everyone else doing the same exact thing. So, with that, my name is Sean, and I'm a stupid piece of shit with a 1-inch flaccid dick, which are the only two qualifications required to talk about stuff on the internet. I'm a useless fucking mutt that's out of my gourd. Welcome to my delusional nightmare. I am the Scr00bl0rd.
Keep the faith, brothers!